So we set out to do this, and this was, again, teachers from different curriculum committees. So there were people from the English Language Arts curriculum and people at the ministry and several people here and there that got brought in. So we looked at the curricular competencies and said, okay, how can we group these into criteria categories? Now in math, there were either 3 or 6, depending how you count, right? There's an and in between all. Science, there were some. English language arts, no. Social studies, then we sat, how many social studies teachers here? Or people who know the social studies curriculum? Nobody? Yeah. Well, we sat down and thought for about 2 months, which is really common when you're developing stuff in social studies, right? About whether to use the big 6 thinking skills as the framework, or whether to build the framework around inquiry. And it ultimately got built around inquiry with the big 6 down the side. So everybody got everything they wanted. But the decision, Angie Kahlberg, who was directing it from the ministry, Angie was determined that we would have the same number of categories for each of the learning areas so that we could put them on a chart and look across. So a teacher could look across and say, you know, this is science, this is social studies, this is English language arts, and here are the commonalities. And you would begin to have a simpler story to tell kids and a simpler story to tell parents. And particularly for generalists who are teaching all of the things, or for people who wanted to do cross-curricular work. You know, if you're just teaching history, you can use a historian's framework and you can make it as complex as you want. But if that's what you're doing 2 hours a week while you're doing all of these other things in the other hours, it starts to be a bit beyond. So remember that this is all voluntary. Everything I'm showing you is an optional resource. You don't have to do it. And because it's voluntary and optional, you can take it and change it. So if you look at something and you say, well, this is pretty good, but I don't like that part, you can just cut that part out. If you say there's something missing here, I need another whole category, feel free to add it. So we found categories and using the curricular competencies, teased out, the teachers did, not me, teased out a small number of criteria that were really key to each category. And again, that's a judgment call, right? They could have chosen different ones. They really tried to get at what the essence was. And then looked at, and made charts out of that, and looked at all the applications there could be. And you can't read on one of my slides, or the applications here, you can't read them. That's because there is a tidier list, and I couldn't transfer it. But an application is, you know, make a test, design a performance task, observe the kid working, have a conference, get a self-assessment, all the different ways you can assess. So within that subject area, within that cluster of grades, you have the same criteria for all the different things you might do. So now you've cut down the number of different ideas you have to introduce. So when you say to kids, you know, here's a framework for Science 8. I'll do language arts. Here's a framework for English language arts 8. It doesn't change because the task changed. The framework is anchored in the curricular competencies, not in the tasks kids do. And over time, they should demonstrate those. Okay? So take a minute, say something to the person next to you, and I'll just barrel on.